Great. So we're going to start our morning workshops now as part of the Time to Grow programme, and going to capture these for any listen again options and needs that people have. As I've said, for anyone who arrived just recently, we've got a legal structures and good governance session. I know a number of people on our Time to Grow programme here are either setting up social enterprises, have set something up, and might be just reflecting and reviewing on kind of what's working for them. And there'll be people who are here with an idea that are probably a number of months or maybe even a number of years off this, but it's good to have an overview of what legal structures and good governance is and looks like when you're trying to develop and grow a project for different reasons we'll come on to. Joe's going to run a session on developing your business model canvas. And we'll take a lunch break, and Vicky, one of our programme participants, is running an introduction to marketing and social media, because that's what her business and her career to date has all been about. So I'm going to jump to legal structures. So are you sitting comfortably? Have you got your coffee and your nibbles? Really, this isn't meant to be a dry session. It's hopefully legal structures are really what helps you bring your project to life. It's what helps give it, as it says, a structure. It gives it a way of operating and being. It gives it a way of being recognised as perhaps something more than yourself. And ultimately, it gives you a way of applying for funding and building your team and having more people involved. So we're going to look at what these things are and what questions you might ask yourself to make some decisions around this sort of stuff, when you're ready and when you're not, and who you might need to involve in these sorts of things, and what people's roles and responsibilities are some of the things we're going to be covering. And then we'll also be looking at some examples and asking questions around this sort of stuff. So I'm not going to go through who these pretty pictures are. We will no doubt share those as case studies a bit later on. But first things first, before people get into legal structures, I'm just going to run through, what do you ask yourself? What do you need to know, you or your group or your community or the people that you might be involving in what it is you're doing? And there's different reasons you might want to set up a legal structure. Sometimes it's about who's going to own or run this thing. Sometimes it's to do with income generation. Sometimes it's to do with, what your community and what the wider market might need. And sometimes it's about building trust and thinking about how you need to be viewed by your community or by the public. So, there's a bunch of questions I'd be asking yourself, if you haven't already set a structure up, who's running this project or this organisation or this thing, and who might be running it in the future, and who do you foresee owning this? Is it you? Is it your business and what you're owning and what you're developing? Do you see this as being a broader, more sort of democratic, community-owned organisation? So that's something to consider that helps you sort of decide what kind of project or organisation you're growing. You've then thinking about, how's this thing going to make money? Where will its income come from? And have you got the money to start up? Sometimes people jump on the kind of social enterprise bandwagon as a way to get started, and there's the right and wrong way of doing that. But ultimately, running a social enterprise, creating social change, and grow, on your own or part of a team or with a wider sort of community group, is it takes some effort and it takes some resources, and thinking about where they're going to come from is key in any of this stuff. And can your come back to this, but can your community afford to pay for what it is that you're setting up? Because this all has a bearing on what kind of legal structure or how you might operate. When you come to the point of, making profits or surpluses, what do you want to happen to those? And what are the tax implications for the way you might operate? As I just said, has your community got the means to pay for what you want? Often people set up social enterprises in places that, communities don't have the money to pay for it, but they, shouldn't be underserved, and they shouldn't not get, amenities or products or services that they need just because of levels of poverty. And so social enterprises set up kind of Robin Hood effect businesses, or they set up ways of creating commission contracts, or going in to look at where councils or the private sector or other clients and customers, if you will, are paying for what this product or services is, in order to be able to subsidise that or offer that for free to their community. And social enterprise structures are a great way to enable that to happen. To what extent do you want the community involved? You know, certain funders and certain schools of thought and certain types of social enterprise structure or community enterprise structure will have communities play more of a stake or more of a role in the decision making of what happens. And so, you know, to what extent are you open to that in the future? You know, is this your baby and your business and your thing? Or actually, in order to create the social change that you want to see, are you needing to invite your community in, not least to give you market research and market intelligence and help you make sure you're meeting customer and community demand, but they may also have other roles to play, and certain funders won't fund you unless you have you know, clear ways of community engagement and clear ways of having diverse representation on your board. So it's something to consider. And you know, will having the community or a wider group of people involved in what you're doing be helpful? You know, be helpful for you for support, be helpful for you for knowledge, be helpful for you to, you know, create wider change, you know, be helpful for insights and extra hands on deck. You know, there's different reasons as to why you do this sort of thing. And initially, you know, that can be quite a fearful thing. And you know, who do you want to work with? Who do you trust? Who will do things the way you want? You know, there's lots of things to think about before you know, build that group of people around you or form that team. But these are all questions to ponder, even if you're at the start of something, just to think about, you know, what's the level of ambition or the level of development or even the level of growth that you want to see with what you're doing. And in order to be trusted by the public, be a legitimate organisation, whether that's a, you know, more private or more of a either charitable community social enterprise organisation, you know, reputationally, how do you need to be seen? What do you need to be doing? And, you know, what do people need to think about what you do? And ultimately, going through these sorts of questions help you think about, you know, and we're going to go through what these things mean. You know, do you incorporate or not? You know, and if you are, you know, who's this team or who needs to be involved? You know, is it a group? Is it, you know, a steering group? Is it a board? Is it a manager? You know, what you're going to call yourselves and how are you going to operate? Are you setting up something that's more of a private profit making? So you might be setting up as a sole trader, or you might be setting up as a private business, or are you looking more at a, you know, profit for purpose, where you're creating surpluses to reinvest, but not to the point where you're becoming a charity? There's a spectrum of different types of structures that we're going to look at in just a minute. So these questions relate to that. And then, as I said before, have you got the cash to start? You know, is there a business model and can the community pay? You know, all help shape what it is you are likely to need to do to get started and to become whatever it is you're trying to develop. Is there a genuine social purpose and some social value behind what you're doing? Because, you know, some of those things will help you look at, you know, who might fund you, who might have a vested interest in investing in what it is you do. So, it's something to check and think about, and we will be looking at what is social value and how you measure that in a future session. And then, you know, as we've said before, you know, what role are the community playing, you know, in your organisation? Are they just beneficiaries? Do you just deliver a service and they take this service, they engage in this service, they buy this service, or have they got a more of an influential role, a guiding role, or a strategic role in how you want to operate? So we'll throw that out there as a whole bundle of questions to think about. I'm going to show you another slide which talks about what these different legal structures are, and then we can perhaps take some questions, or feel free to put questions in the chat, and we can come back to some of those. So I just, you know, I don't know if this makes full sense to people, probably, but this slide here is basically showing you the spectrum. what I'm showing you two things here. I'm showing you the spectrum of different legal structures that there are, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And because, as many of you are aware, social enterprises, community organisations, charities and other things, any business, frankly, is often looking for some form of funding or investment to start up and grow. This gives you a feel for the kinds of funding or investment you can go for as an organisation setting something up. So on the one side here, we've got private structures, including sole traders, company limited by shares and co-ops. So the more private the nature of the venture that you're setting up, the less funding there is. Certainly community funding, lottery funding, charitable funding, the less funding there is to go at to help you start and scale, and to test things out, and to deliver community impact, because that's often what the funds and funding is out there to do. So private businesses, whilst there is funding out there, and clearly there's banks, and private businesses go for contracts, and anybody can crowdfund. There's crowdfunding platforms for all types of businesses, which is why that's sort of spread across the piece there. The private sector, and certainly the sole trader sector, isn't necessarily somewhere where you're going to be able to go for funds to start and scale in the same way that you might as a social enterprise, if that's what you're looking to do. So it's just one end of the spectrum. At the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the more charitable end of the spectrum. So companies limited by guarantee with charitable status are something that some of you might be considering. Companies limited by guarantee with KIC status that have more charitable aims. I mean, all KICs will have an element of charitable aims in what they're doing, but there are some that are more charitable than others, should we say, in terms of the way they operate, plan to set up, and who it is they work with. There are people selling, chocolate bars and water and flip-flops that look and feel a bit more like a private business, although they're reinvesting their profits back into community good. And then there are those that are set up, working with directly with homeless people, or directly with young carers, or are all about relieving poverty and advancing education and these sorts of things, which are charitable aims. So there's different ways of looking and feeling as a social enterprise, depending on how charitable you want and need to be, and what your community sort of is needing. There's something called an unincorporated association, which we've talked about, which is, I'll go into a bit more detail about shortly, which is looking at, it's a community group. It's an unincorporated organisation and model that helps you, can help you get started, and can actually work for some time for people. And some unincorporated associations run forevermore. Lots of sports clubs, mother and toddler groups, lots of different kinds of community groups that are delivering services or running activities operate in this way. But they can also be a good test ground for getting moving and for applying for some initial funding. Because as you'll see, at this end of the spectrum, whether it's the company limited by guarantee charity, a more charitable KIC, a not-for-profit voluntary unincorporated association, or a BENCOM, which is a BENCOM is the charitable version of a co-op. They all have the ability to fundraise in ways that other types of more private businesses don't, because they're more charitable in nature, they're not-for-profit, and they are moving forward with all of that. In the middle here, it's not that much different from any other end. It's just making a recognition that there's a middle ground here, that opposed to being purely charitable and a physical charity. There are structures that are a kind of hybrid models. So company limited by guarantee is often a structure that KICs and charities go for, and it's just highlighting here that you don't have to be a KIC and you don't have to be a charity. You can be just a company limited by guarantee with a not-for-private profit set of governing documents that gives you a certain amount of flexibility as a not-for-profit organisation. That a KIC will have an asset lock in it, and it's thinking about, is that something I want or not? So that's why we've separated out company limited by guarantee with kick status and without. And that kick status really is there to, I guess, create almost a bit of a brand for social enterprise to some degree, but also to make sure that any assets are locked in for the benefit of the community. And over time, that's been, initially people are a bit wary of, how will this work and so on. But don't quote me, I don't know how many thousands of kicks there are now, but there's a growing number. You can look on the kick regulator's website for current figures on that. But kicks create that asset lock, and they're an organisation in which directors can genuinely be paid, which in other sort of charitable forms that's not the case. Co-ops sort of sit across the board there. There's different forms of co-ops. There's more sort of private structured co-ops. There's more social enterprise natured co-ops. And then there's the charitable forms of co-ops. And often people will set co-ops up either if they're coming from that background where they understand co-ops and they want to be one, or if they are incentivised to do so. So Cooperatives UK and a number of other organisations out there actively support co-ops to set up. So there is some additional funding and additional support to become a co-op. I guess I wouldn't say the downsides of being a co-op, because it's horses for courses, but there's less case law out there for co-ops, and co-ops can be more costly to set up. So, in terms of case law, if something needs to be taken to court, or if you need legal intervention for something, there's just less case law around for co-ops for company lawyers to look at, which was always something that sort of I picked up on. And the cost of it, setting up a kick or a company limited by guarantee is done for sort of £30–40, not including any legal advice that you might take around that. But often the templates and the tools that are out there on the websites, be it the kick regulator or Companies House to help you set these things up, are all fairly straightforward. And unless you're wanting something niche or nuanced or something different, you shouldn't need to spend loads of money in legal advice to set one up. So setting up an unincorporated association is pretty much free. Setting up a company limited by guarantee of some sort, or company limited by shares, there is a cost attached, but it's not costly. And but setting up a co-op does cost several £100s. The CIO that's in there is a charitable incorporated organisation, and that's again, it's just a kind of modernised version of the charity. And actually, most companies limited by guarantee with charitable status, which is what most charities are, unless they're an exempt charity, which I'll talk to you again about. The CIO is the new form of charity, and as I say, I've sat it in the middle there only because directors can be paid in a CIO, whereas they can't in a company limited by guarantee. So it's just there's different forms, and we can talk to people individually about all of this, and there are other agencies as well out there that can help you. But I wanted to give you the spectrum there to sort of have a sense of this. And I wondered if anybody's got, before I go on to some other bits, I wondered if anybody's got any questions or anything that doesn't make sense at this stage. We wanted to set the spectrum out there that shows you that there's this charitable end, and there's a range of different structures to help you. There's a more private sector end, and then there's a kind of chunk in the middle. And there's a social enterprise isn't a legal structure, is the bottom line. It's a term, and there are various routes to setting up a legal structure that makes you a social enterprise or a community business or a not-for-profit profit organisation. And these things all have ways of creating social change and have different costs attached to setting them up, different pros and cons. And I just wondered if anybody got any questions at this stage. Feel free to come off mute if you've got any burning questions or anything there. Have I sent you all to sleep with this? I wonder, has anybody out there set one up and wants to come on and say what they've established and why? Might be who we got.
Nicola, can I just ask, is it quite easy to if I went on and looked up the different headings for getting examples of different companies?
I've got some coming up.
Oh, right, fab.
Yeah, and we can, what we'll often do, I know this seems a bit dry today, we've got a really good podcast. Joe, I don't know if you might nip online and just put the podcast that you actually, it's got your shiny face on the front cover of. If you put the link to the podcast in the chat, that's a great little 30-minute, 40-minute podcast that helps you hear stories from people as to what they've set up. And normally we'd have a little panel of somebody who's set up a co-op, somebody who set up a charity, and somebody who set up a kick, for example, talking about what they set up and why and how it helps them. And this podcast gives you that additional information to kind of help you think what might be right for me. And there's lots of different businesses involved in that talk about why they've set up what they've done, if that's helpful. Any other questions? Interested in hearing more about the sole trader info. So no, so a sole trader is a different thing to a company limited by guarantee. If you see a sole trader, in fact, let me come on to this next slide because this will explain this. You've moved me on, Vicky, which is good in a way, time-wise, but feel free to either put questions in the chat or we'll come back to questions. So the next thing I just wanted to talk about was what are these things and how they're different. And I'm sorry if this is a bit baffling, but ultimately you've got an idea and you just got to pilot it and test it and get on with it. See if it works, see if you believe in yourself enough to do it, and see if people will listen and get on board and ultimately pay for this thing, be them the public, be them other commissioners or somebody else. And so don't let any of this put you off getting started and having a go. People can get bogged down in this to the point where it can cripple them, and that's not what we want. We want people to get moving and get started, which is what you're all starting to do. But this is what helps you organise yourself, think about to what extent you're operating and need to be accountable and transparent to other people, and certainly to be able to go for funding, there's certain things you need to do. So Vicky was asking a question there about is a sole trader, can it be a company limited by guarantee? So you'll see here, I'm just going to whiz through unincorporated organisations, incorporated organisations, and co-ops, which are a form of that but work slightly differently. So unincorporated, which is what a lot of you will be right now, whether you realise it or not. You'll either be an unincorporated association or a sole trader right now, or some volunteer tinkering with an idea. If you're starting to earn some money from what you're doing and you're on your own, you're a sole trader, and usually, don't quote me on it, but within around 3 months, you need to be registering with the Inland Revenue to get this UTR number, unique tax reference number, and you are then up and operating as a sole trader, which is a type of business. And loads of businesses are sole traders. Lots of hairdressers, fruit and veg stores, window cleaners. There's lots of SMEs, small, medium enterprises that operate as a sole trader model that never incorporate as a company. They just operate as they are, and they stay like that for their whole business life. And there are many social entrepreneurs that operate as sole traders, lots of freelancers working in the social change sector. But sole traders can't apply for funding. They're an individual and they're not accountable particularly to anyone. And charities and other forms of public money won't be seen to be investing in sole traders because there's no follow through. You're unincorporated. You can't be tracked. You're not reporting back to anybody to show and demonstrate how you operate, other than the taxman, to be fair, and you might have an accountant. Sole traders just aren't the right fit for funding in the charity sector. Unincorporated associations, on the other hand, are. And so if you're working like Jenny, who was just asking questions before, Jenny, there's 2 or 3 of them that are working on the kind of older people support and care support. If you're a 2 or 3 man or woman band or more, you start to become a kind of group that, whether you've got a constitution or not, you're an unincorporated association. And what I will often, and it's here in the top tips, if you're trying to grow but you're not ready to incorporate yet, and you've not really decided on what you're doing fully, and you're testing things, or you can't quite see where the business model is and what you're doing fully, so you don't want to take the full leap into setting up a company, then having a constitution and setting up as an unincorporated association can be a really good way of forming and operating with 3 non-related family members, or I say family members, 3 non-related people, to start applying for some funding to grow, test, or evolve what it is you're doing, and work with perhaps communities that can't afford to pay for it. So being unincorporated and getting started is a way to go. But there are other people who want to either jump straight into being a company, you know, or hadn't realised that there were other more creative ways to get going that can help you. So unincorporated associations, what I will just say is you are, you know, solely responsible either as a group if you're an unincorporated association or as a sole trader, or, you know, charitable trusts aren't incorporated, and that's when I talked about this exempt charity. I don't think there's anybody that we're working with who's in that boat, but there's a good chance that the people on our programme might want to set up as a sole trader if they're trading, or they're ready to start trading, or they might in the near future. Or the unincorporated association model could be a useful test bed and test ground to evolve and apply for some money and get moving forward. I know Anne, who's setting up those health and wellbeing services, have got, you know, have constituted what they're doing. They've started to apply for some local small grants to test some workshops out. So it's that kind of thing. The question that Vicky asked before around, you know, is a sole trader a company limited by guarantee? No, as you'll see, sole traders might start off as they are, and then as they grow, they might become a company. And so you'd evolve, you potentially evolve from being a sole trader into a company, whatever, company limited by guarantee, company limited by shares, whichever you see as the best fit for you. This generally means a couple of things. It means that you have limited liability, which doesn't mean that you feign all responsibility for running your business. There's plenty of ways in which you have to be responsible, which we'll come on to in a minute. But a company limited by guarantee means that the directors have a limited liability of up to £1. Your memorandum and articles of association are the governing document this time. You know, rather than a sole trader that has a UTR number, a relationship with the taxman, and that's that. You know, they might have a business plan and they might have ways of operating what they're doing, but, you know, they're not reporting back to a particular body, and they don't have governing documents, so to speak. An unincorporated association has a constitution, which is sort of 2 or 3 sides of A4, and we've got templates of those that we can share with people to sort of, that helps you set out what your aims and objects are, how you're going to operate. You know, that you'll have a minimum of 3, you know, members and a maximum of whatever. You know, those are the documents. With the incorporated, they have a memorandum and articles of association, and they're more lengthy and they're more structured, and they set out, you know, many more clauses for, you know, how you will and won't operate. You know, how you make decisions, how you manage your money. What happens should you wind up, and, you know, what happens to your assets, which in the case of the community interest companies, there's this asset lock on. So a company limited by guarantee is one form of that. There's a company limited by shares, and there's I don't know why it says CIO, Charitable Incorporated Organisation. And so one thing to just point out on this, more often than not, people that we work with, they'll either be an unincorporated association in the making or established, a sole trader, because that's how they just feel best, either working on their own or keeping things low key for now, or, you know, they're freelancing for social change, so they're doing things slightly differently. But there comes a point for some where they evolve into, you know, one of these company forms. Companies limited by guarantee are a model, and you can attach various forms of status. So there's charity status that can be attached onto that makes you more accountable to the wider community, much more rigorously checked by the Charities Commission, and you'll have certain levels of reporting back to them. A kick status can be put on that, which you report to the kick regulator, which is a kind of offshoot of Companies House. And again, you're accountable, you're transparent, your information gets put up, your accounts and so forth. The data's there for all to see on your annual accounts and so forth. And if you don't have one of these, if you're not a charity and you're not a kick, then your accounts are published via Companies House, and they're all searchable. And once you set up as a company and you have a company number, people can search for you and check that you're a bona fide company, check that your accounts are up to date, check that you're, you don't have to be making a profit, but that you have to be operating and showing that you're a viable concern. So companies limited by shares, also reporting back to Companies House. There are social enterprise versions of this, so you can attach kick status on a company limited by shares. And what I will say is, more often than not, people have historically set up as companies limited by guarantee because they're a bit more flexible, they're more adaptable, and they're more in line with that sort of, what shall I say? You can invite your sort of wider community onto that, and they fit within a certainly within funding priorities and within sort of community democracy, if you will, that some social enterprises go for. Companies limited by shares fit a slightly more private model in that, whereas most social enterprises aren't shareholder-led and they aren't making profits to pay to their shareholders, they're making profits to reinvest back in their community. There is this company limited by shares model that a lot of more sort of private-facing social enterprises have set up, or companies that want to seek larger scale social investment have wanted to set up. So we can talk to people on a case-by-case basis, and it's great that there are these different options, so that depending on how you feel instinctively or what your community or your investors might want to see you formed as, works for everyone involved. And the Charitable Incorporated organisation, they're already a charity. They're regulated by the Charities Commission, and they also have member arts. Just quickly, co-ops. There's a few different forms of co-ops. The BENCOM, which is the charitable version, sort of standard co-op, which is monitored by the FSA. And they'll have cooperative principles and cooperative ways of working, but they're not necessarily a charity as such. They'll be reinvesting certain levels of profits back in their community, but they're not recognised as charities, and work as co-ops, where different people come together to work and earn. And social enterprises and social enterprise type organisations, sit across all of these types. So there's probably a lot of information to take in there, but we thought we'd best just give you the lingo for now, so that you've got it in your mind, and that we can talk to you about this on a one-to-one when people are ready for it. And as I say, these questions that we asked at the start here, I'll just jump back, who's going to own this thing? How might it generate income? How do you want your market and your community to be involved, and how do you need to be seen? Dictates, all of this stuff. So, if you want to be owning this company or this thing, being a sole trader or being a private company of some sort will be what you want to do. But if you're looking at having this as a community-owned thing, or that you're looking at setting this up as some not-for-profit and charitable organisation, all of these structures, can potentially help you do that to a greater or lesser degree, depending on, what levels of reporting that you want to have, and whether or not, you're ready to take on, 3, non-related directors, and all of these sorts of things. So in a nutshell, most people, when they're starting out, will either be a sole trader with a kind of profit for purpose sort of angle around what they're doing, and may evolve into becoming some other thing, like an unincorporated association or some sort of company structure. So quick example, Joe and I, when we first set up Flourish, we were called the Women Supporting Social Entrepreneurs Network. Wasn't that a mouthful? And we had a constitution, and we formed this unincorporated association, WSSE, and we applied for some small pots of money to test and trial what might work, some workshops, some events, got a little bit of marketing sorted, and got operating to see how it felt, see how we might work together. There was me, Joe, and a lady called Anne Strachan, who were the first three who could apply for funding and see how it felt. And it felt good and it worked. And after a couple of years, we decided that we were ready to form as a company, and we decided to go for the KIC status because that felt right for us. We were happy to have that asset lock and keep our money for the benefit of the community, or whatever we evolved, the assets for the benefit of the community. Within any of this, that doesn't stop us being paid, so within any of these, being paid to deliver services, KIC can pay their directors, and so people earn a good living, and as long as they're making the money to, but they can earn a good living in setting these things up, but they reinvest their profits back into this. So it depends, how you feel about that sort of thing. But for us, that worked fine. So we evolved from an unincorporated association into a company limited by guarantee with KIC status. But as an aside, I also set up an unincorporated association pop-up spa and retreat. So we have a separate sort of project association that can raise funds in its own right as a community project to deliver spa treatments and health and well-being events and things like that. So there's ways of creatively using the structures that are out there to test, trial, or to scale and grow what it is you do. Does that make sense? I'm conscious that we're coming up to our time, and I just wondered if anybody's got any questions, either come off mute or pop them in the chat. Hopefully I'm not frying people's brains. I just wanted to reiterate though. Go for it, yeah. Fire away.
So I was just thinking in terms of the unrelated directors.
Yeah.
Is that guidance or is that a rule?
Sorry, can you say that again? It was a bit crackly.
So with regards to having unrelated directors on the same board.
So what that means is, so there are plenty of social enterprises that have husband and wife teams or sisters or cousins. So you can have family members on your board. It's not that you're not allowed. It's just boards normally need to be seen to be community representative. So having more diverse and a wider range is something to be encouraged. But in terms of the eyes of funders, you're not eligible to apply for funding unless you have 3 non-related directors on your board. So you might have 4 or 5 directors. This is something we're going to come on to just quickly, is that I would say to get started, a minimum of 3 is what a funder would expect to see. It shows it's not just you, that there's a range of wider thoughts and voices and ideas going through, and ideally across those initial 3, there's some community representation in terms of what that social group, community group or social enterprise is trying to do. And if you've got family members there, it's a case of you'll need 3 to 5 initial members of your steering group or initial members of your directors board. Does that make sense? So it does happen, it's not illegal, it's just in the eyes of funders, you've got to have a minimum of 3 non-related on that board. And typically when people are setting up, I say, in the region of about 5 directors is a kind of healthy thing, because it gives you some wider voices and some wider champions and ambassadors and people involved in what you're doing. It's just, we talk initially 3 to 5 directors can be a healthy, manageable way to get the thing moving forward. And often in your governing documents, you might put, 3 to 10 or 3 to 12 to give you room to grow. But in reality, 3 to 5 directors, is seen as okay, is seen as potentially diverse enough for you in getting started. It depends on the scale of what you're doing and how you need to operate.
Thank you.
No props. So
Nicola, Alice has asked a question there.
What was the question? Sorry.
She's saying that she'd struggle with 3. She's got colleagues who would support, but how would you meet people who want to go into business with you and be sort of a formal director
Good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What I don't know if you remember the session that we did, that mapping out your stakeholders and critical thinking. A couple of sessions back, we looked at who do you know and what kind of stakeholders are these people, and a bit like this, saying you are more than your legal structure. Absolutely, you can't rush into this stuff. You have to find the right people, and I would suggest, depends. There's ways of mapping out who you know and thinking who do you trust, who's got complementary skills, who might have the time and the interest. So Joe and I were former work colleagues. Joe was my boss many moons ago, and we've always got on. We've always had an interest in social enterprise, and we found that we've got a joint interest in supporting women social change makers. So Joe and I were, we talked about this, and it just we had some frank conversations, and we invited people to come and hear what it was we were trying to do. We got 10 women in a room and talked to them about our ideas and said, this is what we're thinking of doing. We created a focus group basically to test and shape our ideas and to sound out what we were doing with people who we respected and trusted, people who we thought might need our service, and people who we thought might even invest in it longer term. And we sought their ideas, and they fed that back to us. And so me, Joe, and another lady called Anne, who we'd known, she valued what we were doing. She knew we needed another name on the forums, so to speak, and she was happy to back and support that. And she'd got an understanding of the voluntary community sector, so it wasn't something unknown to her, and it wasn't something she was nervous about. But I think having a look at who's in your community who might already be running something that would be happy to put their name to this. Sometimes that you can say, I'm getting started and I just need somebody to come on for the next 6 to 12 months whilst we get started, and then we can review things, and we might put a wider call out for new people, or they've got a get out of jail free card basically. If either things don't work out, you don't get on, or they haven't got the time to support you. So there's ways of putting parameters in to invite people in to get involved. And we've got people who we know. You can post stuff in some of our Facebook pages and things like that where there might be people that are interested. Your local councils for voluntary services put posts out for looking for board directors for such and such, or looking for committee members for such and such. So there's ways of reaching out to people. I think when you first get started, you just want to go for kind of who you know, which is understandable. But I think if you can have a think about who's got complementary skills to you, who's got energy, and it might be it's a case of who will just sit quietly in the corner and let you get on with it. There's different ways and approaches that people take to this, but I would say certainly once you certainly once you get past the first year or so, making some decisions around what skills gaps you've got as a group, who else you might want to invite onto your board, and getting some support to make things work well is a good time. After a year or so of testing and tinkering, you can then start to see who's going to be.
I think just on Alice's point, she's just put there that she agrees a focus group would be great, but just assume people would be too busy though with their own great ideas. Well, to be honest, I think when Nicola and I first started to talk about Flourish, and we set up the kind of WSSE, Women Supporting Social Enterprise Network, we were both running our own businesses anyway, and we continue to do that. So it's not that people have to sort of commit to your idea and not have any other commitments. They may have that, but they may just want to be part of your team, because when you're working in isolation, because I was working on my own, Nicola was working on her own, but the time when we came together to talk about Flourish and develop that piece of work and that business was great, because we felt supported, we could bounce ideas off each other, and we continue to run our own little side hustles as well. So it doesn't mean that people have to fully commit. I think it's just managing people's expectations. And like I say, we brought Anne in early on, and to get the kind of three 3 unrelated directors, and while she was really supportive, she wasn't really interested in the operational side of the business. She wasn't interested in delivery. She was very much interested in just kind of being that sounding board for us. And then as the business grew, we've had to reflect on that, and actually we wanted people that were interested in doing stuff and delivering, and that's when we opened up our trustee. We had a call out asking for more directors, and we brought sort of 3-4 on board, and they're working with us now. So it does move as the business moves and the enterprise develops.
And as Vicky said there, I mentioned CVSs. Vicky's mentioned, you know, Wigan Borough Community Partnership are our Wigan CVS, and there's MAC in Manchester, Salford CVS, Action Together, Sector 3 in Stockport, and various others who can help you. Sometimes you're looking for people who are retired, like she says, or ex-accountants or ex-legal people, you know, if you feel you need those skills. But sometimes you're just needing people who are part of that community or have a shared goal and a shared interest. So it's kind of horses for courses, and just, you know, getting good conversations happening to help you make that happen. I don't want to eat into too much of Joe's time here, so I'm just yes, be brave and start asking. You know, they can only say no. What's the worst that can happen? and sometimes just, you know, even if somebody's you don't have to have everybody on your board either. You know, there's advisors and there's, you know, mentors, and there's people, you know, there's people out in your community that you can have coffee with. Doesn't mean that you necessarily need to have them on your board. You know, so it's a case of you can still get that support and that advice without them being physically involved, or vice versa. If they're already there and they're showing an interest, maybe that for 6 to 12 months or longer, they might be interested in getting involved. So have a see, and you can have these conversations in breakouts and things in future times to see what other people have been doing. And I'd be keen to hear from some of the organisations who have incorporated, because I know we've got a few, to get their take on this, and we can make sure we can have conversations around that. Joe will be coming back to a lot of this, but I was just highlighting that you are so much more than your legal structure, as all of this says, and we'll come back to some of that. I'm just seeing if there's anything key. Yes, this is homework, should we say, for you before we hand over to Joe in a second. You know, how do you plan to operate as a team and govern the organisation is the key thing, you know, and whether you're on your own or whether you've got a few people around you, certainly once you get to the point where you're looking at perhaps an unincorporated association or some sort of company or charity or whatever's relevant for you, you know, there's people and processes and logistics to put in place. There's, you know, the roles of directors and or these people that support you, or the management committee, or your working group, whatever you're calling yourselves, to get moving. But, you know, ultimately they're often there as a sounding board and support, you know, the people who have founded the thing, that they're there to help promote and connect you. They might bring specialist skills and knowledge, you know, but what else, you know, do you need in people who you might ask to come and help you? And sometimes just setting out a very basic bullet points. This is what I'm needing. This is what I need from you. This is what I can offer, or this is what I need from you. And I'd just be looking for people to, you know, support me once a month or once a quarter in this way. You set out the expectations and people can soon see whether they can or can't get involved. And I think it's just, you know, having a think about how you'll work best and most effectively. And, you know, there's no rush to do this, but certainly as a community or social enterprise organisation, and especially if you're applying for funding and achieving, you know, delivering things as a result of funding, you need to be accountable and just thinking about what your support needs are going into some of this. This is the homework bit. You know, I won't prattle along all of this, but, you know, roles of directors, roles of trustees, you know, similar. There's some slides here that just outlines what the roles of directors are, or, you know, and what you're going to be expected to do if you get to the points of setting up a company, which is why, you know, with an unincorporated association, this isn't quite as written in stone, but it's still there. You've still got to operate well, govern yourself well, and communicate well, so that the people that you're working with to run what it is you're doing are all part of, you know, the same team and head in the right direction. you know, ultimately you've got to degree a certain level of skill and care in running what you're doing. And, you know, that's not to put you off and say, oh, you know, you've got to know what you're doing all the time, because most people are winging it when they're running these things. You know, there aren't really, you know, heaps of courses that can help you figure out the way you want to run your exact business or your exact group or organization. But certainly when you get to the point where you're setting up a company, these things start to kick in. You know, demonstrate, you know, that they can demonstrate that you're able to govern and manage the organization well, act responsibly, you know, act in good faith in the interest of the company, certain, you know, things that you have to do in order to meet both the needs of the company and be inclusive, but also to be transparent and you know, not creating conflicts of interest and not breaking any laws. And, you know, in terms of those laws, clearly obeying the law of the land is one thing, but company law for people who end up going down that route, you know, you have to produce proper accounts and send these either to Companies House or to your KIT regulator. You can do that directly, or often working through an accountant is a helpful way to take that weight off your hands. And Morag's not here, but I'm sure she'd be saying something about that currently. And we have an accountant that helps us with that. You have to obviously follow, you know, general health and safety and employment law if you're employing people, and other tax laws. And you're obviously responsible if you're taking on employees. Many of you aren't at that stage yet, but it's making you aware. And, you know, Joe and I formed Flourish. You know, we bit the bullet after a couple of years and decided we were going to, you know, obey these rules and laws. And it's not so scary. And, you know, we work as a team, and we've got policies and procedures in place that helps us guide the way we work and helps people that we take on know that we don't physically employ anybody. That is something else. You can set up companies and take on employees, or if you're early stage or you've not got the full resources to, you know, offer people, you know, 3-year contracts or 1-year contracts. Lots of social enterprises may take on associates to deliver work, you know, in short-term pieces of work, short-term funding and so forth. So there's different structures and ways of setting up who's going to work for you and how you're going to get things delivered, paying people or, you know, volunteer roles and bringing in associates. So there's different ways that you can make these things work. I'm going to wrap it up there, but you can have a look at this when you get home or you're already home, but after the session it just gives you 3 different examples that you could Google and look up. They're all running. It shows you some different types of structure, and we've, you know, if you've got a particular interest in particular structures, come to us and we can signpost you to other examples. It just talks about, you know, who their direct customers are, because we were talking about that recently, and who their direct beneficiaries are, the kinds of products and services and so forth. But it just helps you to see, you know, the different governing structures that people have set up. You know, there's a couple of charity examples, a company limited by shares example, and just a general company limited by guarantee community interest company. So, you know, there's lots of them about we could share with you, but I've kind of thrown those up there for starters, partly to show you some business models, because Joe's obviously going to be talking about business models, and, you know, we might refer back to some of these types of case studies when we're looking at the rest of the session. So I'm going to wrap it up there, Joe, and unless anyone's got any burning questions, I don't know if you want to take a quick comfort break or get stuck in. It's a bit of a heavy, mine's a bit of a heavy one. I think.
What does everyone want to do? Do you want to take a few minutes?
I don't mind. Anyway, I'm fine.
I don't mind going on.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
fine to carry on.
Get moving. It's the last leg before lunch. So,
great, yeah.
Yeah, just bear with me. But yeah, hopefully it's not too heavy. I think what I'm trying to actually do in this session is to kind of ensure that you can do your business model without feeling too overwhelmed. And that's why I've always used this particular tool, which is the business model canvas. Has anyone on this call used one before? And if they have, just want to drop that in the chat. No? Okay. Doesn't seem like anyone's used one. That's fine. good stuff. So I'm talking to a new audience, which is great. Basically, a business model. Oh, a business model. What is a business model? Well, it's basically a plan that helps you successfully deliver your business enterprise. It identifies all the sources of resources, revenue, your types of customers, and it captures all that, and essentially it tells us how the key drivers of a business fit together. What I find can be really overwhelming with writing down all that information on a Word document is that I end up writing reams and reams of narrative, lots of words, but I find it really overwhelming, and you have to then go through several pages to find the information that you need, and very often you lose the ability to see what the interconnected and the kind of the things that need to fit together. So basically on one page it's far easier and it's far more visible, and it can ensure that you can really be focused on what you're trying to deliver. And this will all become a bit more real in a minute when I show you the actual template. But essentially what we're trying to do is capture on one page how your business is going to operate, and what are the interconnected links to make that happen. So for example, if you were trying to engage a particular customer, then we really need to know how you're going to reach that customer. And we really need to understand kind of what you're going to be telling that customer, you know, why buy off you. So this model canvas kind of puts that very neatly all on one page without any fluff, without too many words. And it becomes very easy for you to kind of see where everything interrelates. So I just find it really helpful as well because I'm quite a visual person. I quite like to have things that I can just reflect back on quite quickly. And with it being on one page, you can actually stick it up somewhere, you know, whether that's above your desk or in the kitchen, on the fridge, whatever. And you can keep on reflecting back on it. And as new ideas come up, you can add that to your business model canvas. Or you can start to, as your business model evolves, you can start to kind of, you know, adapt and refine it. I also find it helpful as well for sharing it with other people, rather than give them a 20-page Word document and say, this is my business model, what do you think? You know, it's a big ask. If you were to send off your business model canvas to someone and say, does this make sense? Do you think that I'm missing anything here? It's an easier ask. You know, someone can just quickly look at that and they can spot things that maybe you haven't seen because you're in it and you're doing it. So it's a really helpful way of doing that. It's also helpful if you have got like other people involved in the business, like any directors or advisory groups, or you could use it actually in a focus group with your intended customers as well, and you know, you test it with them. So I do find it extremely helpful, and it gets you to, you know, following on from our last session, which we looked at personas and we looked at putting the customer at the heart of what we do. It really does encourage you to think more around what value you're going to create for your customers and your beneficiaries. So for me, I find it a really helpful tool, and you know, it will take a couple of goes. I think it's one of those tools that, you know, the more you use it, the better you get at it, and it becomes second nature. The first time you attempt it, you know, it can be a bit, well, you know, it's a lot of blank boxes, but once you start the ideas tripping out of you, it starts to build up and it starts to become really interesting and quite exciting, if business models can be exciting. But if it's going to make your business a success, I would suggest you get excited about it. It helps you feel less foggy because it's all there on one page. It helps you, it just makes you feel more confident around whether your business is actually going to work, because you'll see all the interrelated links that if they all work and they all do as they say, then you're going to have a successful business at the end of the day. But if the results are from this business model that things aren't working out, you can quite easily look at each area and go, oh, is it because I'm not actually delivering value for my customer that I said I would? because I simply didn't quite understand what my customer needed or wanted, or their needs and wants have changed. So it can help you if things aren't going very well. You can look back at it and go, oh, do I need to tweak part of the model to ensure that it'll happen? So, for example, you might be trying to reach customers that are a particular demographic, but your channels to try and reach those customers, which is something Vicky will go on to later in her session, but is around, well, those channels aren't appropriate to reach my customer or to deliver my product. So I'm going to have to really think about my channels. So hopefully it'll give you a really good idea of kind of how things connect, how to tweak things at the right time. And it'll help you get to success, but also highlight if you start to see the wrong results. So, can just go on to the next slide. I think I've got access, have I? I'm co-host.
Here you go.
I can't.
There we go. I've just moved you.
Yeah. I think I've done that one as well. So if you just want to go on to the next one.
Sorry.
Thank you. So this is one of the templates that you can use. This is a business model canvas. This is the canvas. And as you'll see, it's a number of boxes there. And what we tend to do with a business model canvas is there is a bit of a left and right split. So on the left-hand side, broadly speaking, on the left-hand side, these are things that are going to cost you. These are things that you're going to pay out. So you're going to have resources, and you're going to deliver key activities, and you're going to have a cost structure that will reflect that. So, you know, you're going to have delivery costs and stuff like that. On the other side, on the right-hand side, that's more around how you're going to generate business, how you're going to generate revenue. So what I tend to do is start on the right-hand side. I think that once you are really clear of what your value proposition is and who your customers are and how you're going to get to your customers, it then naturally falls that you can then design your key activities to respond to them. So basically, when we talk about customers, and it says segments here on can you see the second one in from the right? Segments. They're your customer segments. And generally in a business, we all have just customers, but in a social business, we tend to have beneficiaries and customers. And the way we differentiate between those two groups is that a customer is someone that's actually going to pay for what you deliver, and a beneficiary is someone that is going to benefit from what you deliver. And that might be that they could be both, they could be the same people. So we say in Vicky's business, her beneficiary and her customer are the same. They're going to purchase support with their online presence and training and things like that around that. And they're going to benefit from that because they're going to get better at it, and they're going to get more confident in it. And they're also going to pay for that, potentially. But she may want to deliver that service to somebody that hasn't got the money to pay for that, because it's really important. It might be somebody in the community that's doing a brilliant job at connecting and supporting their community. They just don't have the resources to pay for any marketing support or comm support. But Vicky feels, as a social entrepreneur, it's really important that they get that support. So the way that Vicky's going to approach supporting that beneficiary will be to find somebody that's willing to pay for that. So it could be a grant. So you might have paying customers who can afford what you're doing and will pay for it quite easily, but you might have people that don't but would benefit from your service. Is that making sense? Can anyone give me an example in their idea or their venture, their enterprise, where the beneficiary might not be in a position to pay for what they're delivering? Can anybody share that with me?
The kind of programs that I want to set up are meant to be accessible to people who will struggle to go to something like the gym anyway. So there'll definitely be beneficiaries of funding that will come through, possibly from other customers who can pay for my personal training services if I choose to offer it through this particular business, as opposed to like a separate private business. So I can see that distinction in that way.
Yeah, fab. So you set up an activity that engages that beneficiary group. So who pays for it? Who's your customer?
So as it stands, it seems like I guess the customer will either be the people who pay via grants, or the customer could be just other people who pay for the actual workout classes. So if I offer an exercise class, I'm given the option of pay what you can classes.
Yeah.
So like pay whatever it is that you can, but then I don't want people who can't pay anything not to come to those. So they'll have access to those classes because other people have actually paid for the classes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's perfect sense. That's a really good example. Thank you for bringing that alive. So yeah, what we've got there, we've got a beneficiary that we want to engage with because it's the right thing to do, but they can't afford it. So we need to find a way of, we can't just give our stuff away. We're going to have to find another way of paying for that. So the customer might be, like you say, it could be a paying customer, someone that's got the financial means to access that service, and I'll be really happy to know that, you know, their contribution is then paying it forward. Or it could be a grant giver, or it could be a commissioned, something commissioned through the local authority, through the leisure, because they're quite keen on engaging a particular beneficiary group that doesn't go to the gym, you know, or it could be through health and social care, for example. So this is where it gets interesting. So when you start listing down your segments for beneficiaries and customers, there's going to be very different ways in which you reach them. So my message to a beneficiary, in that case, my channel to them, oh, right, let's think, where could we find some of those beneficiaries that you just outlined? How might we get to them, and what message might we give to them about our service? So it could be at the school gate. It could be, you know, it could be through the GP practice, you know, someone that's, you know, getting quite poorly because they're not accessing, you know, healthy lifestyle or whatever. So the beneficiary would be reached through that. However, the customer, so if it's, so for example, the local authority or the GP practice, the clinical commissioning group, that's a very different way to reach them. And then that has an impact on what value you're bringing to both your beneficiary and your customer. So the social value proposition for the beneficiary would be, you know, I'm going to help you get fit, feel confident, feel well, feel empowered, engaged, etc. But if you're saying to a GP practice, you're going to feel empowered, engaged, and feel well, well, they'll be like, well, that's not what's in it for me. What's in it for me is that I want to get, you know, my waiting list down, and my GP practice, I want to get my community healthier. So your actual value proposition to your customer will be, I'm going to reduce the amount of times that, you know, people come into your surgery for say medication, because we're going to work with them to get a healthy lifestyle where, you know, they'll feel more connected, more engaged, have better mental health, etc., etc. So you see your messaging kind of shifts a little. So it's really important to understand who your segments are in terms of beneficiaries, who they are in terms of customers, and then have the appropriate messages that you give out to those groups. Is this making sense, everyone? Sorry, because I can't see anyone. I'm just is this
it sounds to me like it is, but but
is there any questions so far, or any observations around that?
It seems to fit a lot with the idea of kind of social prescribing, that you can connect with organisations like a GP surgery and look at an alternative way, like you said, of rather than a GP relying on prescribing a tablet to support someone with anxiety or depression, they could actually be prescribed to a local community group that can support with exercise programs, or tackling loneliness, or reading, shared reading, or anything like that. It's like you said, I suppose it's just looking it's like you said, identifying the difference between the beneficiary and the customer, and being able to be quite business minded, I suppose, when it comes to the customer side of it, and not being afraid to say, no, this is what my service is worth in terms of.
Yeah, that's right. And it's just being confident in those messages, and really understanding, you know, when you think about when people sign up to something or they pay for something, always ask the question, what's in it for me? And it's not normally that explicit, but it is, isn't it? I mean, you know, why would you go to something? You know, you want to know what value you're going to get from it, and that's what both beneficiaries will be looking for and what customers will be looking for. But a beneficiary isn't signing up to a health and wellbeing course because they want to relieve the burden off the GP practice. They'll be thinking of it in a completely different way, and that I just want to feel better. I just want to feel good about myself. And so the customer, the GP practice, say, like, they refer people into you and they pay for your services, then they'll be thinking, they'll have different motivations. So I think what the business canvas, the model canvas does is kind of gets you to ask those questions. And if, for example, you've got in your mind that the customer is a GP practice, and no GP practices are taking you up on this, well, you may have got either your value proposition wrong. It may be something that they don't actually need or want, or you kind of, you're giving them the wrong message. So I think what's helpful with this is that you can, if things aren't going to plan, or for example, you know, you've got loads of GP practices signed up and they're really up for it, but nobody's coming, no one's being referred, or they are being referred, but they're not staying on your course. What's wrong there? Is there something that's not quite working for them? And does something need to be tweaked? Are they the right beneficiaries you should be looking for? You know, and this helps you kind of work through some of that, if that makes sense to everyone. Yeah. So this is a business model. So it's if the model's working, you'll be engaging, you'll have success, and success will be that you engage in the right beneficiaries, you'll be getting paid for what you deliver, you'll be bringing value to those that are engaged in the service, and you'll be making eventually some kind of surplus. And I'm not saying that happens straight away, it certainly doesn't, and you know, it takes time, but you know, that's what you should be working towards ideally. So another example would be, say, I want to work with people that are out of employment, and again the beneficiary there would be unemployed people, and I'd have to find ways of reaching them, and that could be through job centres or job clubs, or again, you know, informal networks like school gates, you know, community centres, whatever, and then the customer there might be, for example, a grant giver or a local authority. And again, my customer value proposition there is that the reason why somebody might buy it from you, like a local authority or maybe a job centre, is that you can reach communities, you're based in communities, you are closer to your communities, you understand, you've got the trust of your community. So that's your customer value proposition. Because, you know, how many times have we seen sort of government run schemes that haven't worked, or has only, you know, helped the few and not been inclusive, or, you know, we see these failings all the time. And actually we as social entrepreneurs can, you know, solve these problems. We can get rid of these headaches that people have got, you know, in terms of local authorities, or, you know, looking at spiraling unemployment rates, or spiraling mental health issues, or issues around, you know, antisocial behaviour, things like that. You know, all of these things, we as community leaders and community change makers, we can help with that. So our value is that they're not close to it, they sit in offices and they're not that close to communities, so we can solve that problem by saying, well, actually, I know my community, I know what they need, and my approach is the best. So that's your customer value proposition. That's absolutely worth buying off me. Why buy off me as an organisation than somebody else? A private sector firm, you know, we've seen private sector firms been taken on to deliver all kinds of government contracts, you know, seen it in the news around the PPE and stuff. You know, what value was created from that? Nothing other than, you know, private companies getting rich. And, you know, we can offer far more value than that. So I think it's just really thinking through that. And I think, you know, Vicky will kind of touch on some of all that later. But testing out your value proposition. So if you've identified a particular beneficiary for your service, following on from the persona setting that we did at the last session, you know, what is that the value that you bring in? You know, when you evaluate maybe the first course that you run or the first workshop that you run, is that language being used back to you? I feel empowered, I feel engaged, I feel confident. If they do, then that's great, because you can then make that your value proposition, and that can be used in your kind of marketing and how to engage your beneficiaries. And then if you find that, say for example, you were running a course for unemployed people and you've got people into work or into training or volunteering, and you've got the evaluation to say, yeah, I got X amount of people into work, then that's your impact measures. So that one on the right hand side, the kind of second box down, you can show, not just say that, you know, that's what you intend to do, but you can eventually, as you test these things and get people through the door and run activities, you can then start to show what impact you're making. And that really adds value and weight to your customer value proposition, because you can then start to demonstrate like a track record. You can start to say, well, yeah, I've got this many people into work, or I've got this many people off, or, you know, coming off medication into exercise or whatever, or, you know, all of those things. So there's lots of different things to consider there. So that's that's on the right hand side. So that's kind of your customers, how to get to them and what value you bring to them. And then I suppose on the left hand side, it's like, well, okay, well, how am I going to do that? What resources do I need to get me there? And key resources are things like, well, it can be people. So we talked earlier on Michaela's session around directors, advisory group members. It could be that there's a particular lack of resource in your current makeup. You know, you might not have, you know, might not be great at finance, or, you know, you might not be that good at understanding your marketing and PR, and you need some extra capacity. So yeah, that's it. You know, you need to think about all of these things around your resources, and consider which ones you can do well and which ones you might need to bring in some extra support for. And that could be, you know, in the startup, it's around just finding people with those skills and seeing if they'll volunteer and be your advisory person, and then longer term looking towards employing or you know, paying for those services as you can. And then, you know, what kind of finance do you need to start up? Can you start up easily, or do you need a grant, or do you need to do some crowdfunding, or, you know, all of those things. So you need to think about what have I got some personal finances to do that? And if I haven't, then, you know, not many people do. So how on earth are you going to sort of test this stuff? How are you going to get over the line to sort of ramp up activity? So start to think about all of those. It says in there access as well. So sometimes you might need to build your relationships with particular customer segments and beneficiary segments. So say if I was running a program around helping people that are coming out of prison to re-engage and get jobs, you know, access might be an issue for me in terms of accessing the prison service. So how am I going to get there? Do I need somebody? Do I need to work with a key partner or stakeholder? And that drops us down into the next box then quite neatly. Is there somebody that I need to work with, engage and partner up with to give me access to those beneficiaries and customers? You know, it could be that, you know, my intended customer is GP practices, but I've got no idea on how to engage with them. So do I need to, how am I going to access them, and who do I need to work with to build that relationship? And that really helped to see where the gaps might be and just give you a plan, because what will evolve from this canvas is an action plan. You know, what am I sure of, what am I unsure of, and what are the things that I need to set up and progress, where are my weak bits. So you might have some really strong intentions on the right hand side of this canvas, but you know, you might have some weaker resources on the left hand side. So what do I need to shore up to kind of get myself to where I need to be? And you know, and then all this takes time, so don't be fearful about completing this and seeing gaps or weaknesses. I think it's just about being really clear and understand where those are, so you know who you might need to work with or what you need to bring in to help you get to where you need to be. And this isn't going to be perfect overnight, and it's a working document. It's something that you tweak and review and reiterate as you test things out, try things, but it just might just highlight some areas where you think, oh, actually this is something I really need some support with. And I'd be happy, you know, through the one-to-one coaching that I'm doing with you all, to work through this with you. We could focus on this if you wanted, if you thought that was of value, and start to populate this and look at some of the areas where you're struggling with. It's quite a good focus point for starting up. So, you've identified your key resources, you've identified your partners, you understand your customers, you understand what you're trying to deliver to them. So I guess the key activities and types of intervention are the things that you need to do to get there. So types of intervention, you know, be clear around what is it that you're going to do. And, you know, say for example, Flourish, when one of our key activities are these programs, these enterprise programs, and the types of intervention back earlier on this year, well, at the start of the year was face-to-face physical activity, you know, being in front of people, being in rooms, building that energy, building that trust. And obviously our interventions had to change. It's moved from physical face-to-face to online. And there's different implications to that. So you've got, you know, we've had to quickly sort of invest in Zoom and understand Zoom and get to grips with Zoom. Whereas if your type of intervention is a physical space, then, you know, where is it going to be held? So some of your key resources might be more that physical space. Do you need a room? Do you need an office? Do you need somewhere private? Do you, you know, it all impacts on every aspect of the canvas. So also if you want to think about key resources, just while I remember, there's like the intellectual stuff. So say for example you're quite keen on delivering an intervention that includes a little bit of coaching or includes some kind of counselling, then some of the key resources that you might be seeking to is some training to formalise what you already do in your practice. So is there some kind of continuous professional development that you need to do to enable you to deliver that type of intervention? If you've got no interest in doing that, do you need to buddy up with somebody that can do that aspect of your activity? So does anybody have any questions at this point, just before I move on? Nope. What time it is? All right, okay. Got 10 more minutes or so. So when we look at the bottom bit, this is all about money, that dirty word money. But basically, oh, let's see if there's something in chat there. Has anyone, sorry, did somebody have a, oh, this was earlier on. Sorry, I'm not very good at checking the chat out when the PowerPoint's on, so do apologise. If anybody's got anything to say, just please just take yourself off mute and talk.
Sorry, there are a couple there I've not noticed. I'll just reshare that.
No.
I've been busy emailing very naughtily. No, yeah, it's all more yeses and nos and things.
Right, okay.
They were answering your "is this making sense" question, and the no's were for something else.
Oh, good. Okay. If there's any no's, then please just put your hand up, or no, just take yourself off mute. But so, okay, the bottom bit's about money. So the left-hand side is about what are going to be your biggest expenditure areas. And then the right-hand side is how are you going to bring in money to the organisation. And then the middle bit is that lovely bit, is if you had any surplus, what would you do with it? And you might not be there yet, but essentially, you know, the surplus that Flourish makes, which isn't huge, you know, we do reinvest that back into the organisation we might use it to test something out, so we don't need a grant to test it out. We can just test it out because we've got a bit of resource there to do it. Or we might add to existing grant programmes, say like so a grant giver's given us £10,000 to deliver something. We might have a surplus there that we can add some value to that. So the grant giver might not be interested in paying volunteer expenses, but we might decide as a company, well, we think that's the right thing to do, so we're going to use our surplus to do that. Or we're going to put on something extra like a social or something and put some drinks and nibbles on, you know, back in the days when we could get in a room with each other. We might choose to do that. So, you know, that's kind of just understanding what you're going to do with your surplus. So your revenue, this is the money you're going to bring in, and it just asks you to put down, you're not going to know straight away, and this is a lot about forecasting and thinking around, you know, what might your revenue be when you start out. Now, you know, for social enterprises, for private businesses, they're going to know they've got so many widgets, and it costs this much to make a widget. It costs £8 out of £10, and then there's a £2 profit. And that's just going to go into the surplus bit. Whereas, you know, we in the social enterprise world, you know, we're not just selling widgets. We're probably going to have a mixed bag of revenue, of income, basically. So it might be that on there, in your first year, you're highly likely to be reliant on getting grants in to pay for activity, to test it, to learn from it, to evaluate it, to build a business case that it works. So your revenue might be 80% grants, 10% donations, and 10% earned income through people directly paying for your service. So ideally, that just needs to shift over time, just to make it a less risky business. Because if all the, you know, grants, you might be successful and just keep on getting grants, but sometimes, you know, once you get one, you can't reapply again, or, you know, you're running the same activity and they keep asking for new projects, new ideas, and you actually just want the money to sustain what you're already doing because it's working. So you want to move away from that grant revenue side of things. So hopefully what it should do is start to shift. So you might see that, you know, eventually in year 3, your revenue is that you directly earned income, trading income, moves to 50%, and you're actually only getting 50% in grant funding. Or, you know, you've actually in year 3 you've decided that you really want to test something out, and you've got a great idea and you think people will get behind it, so you run a crowd fund and you get, you know, 5% of your income in from that. So it does shift, but I think it's just having an idea of where your revenue is coming from, and just assessing the risk of that. You know, is that sustainable? If I'm going to be getting grant funding for the rest of my days, that's eventually going to run out, and that's not really a sustainable way. So actually what would be the better, what in year 3 ideally do I want to be working towards? So year 1, I accept I need to take some grants, I need to test some stuff and build my business case. Right, fine, I'm happy, I've got 80% revenue and whatever. Then, you know, but working towards in year 3 shifting that from 80% to 30%, etc. So that's really what the revenue is, and that's really a kind of best guesstimate of how you think your money's going to come in and through what activity. And then you've got your what do you need to pay out? So if your revenue in there is sort of your 80%, 20% grants, etc., and say it equates to £30,000. Really, what we want to just make sure is that the cost of delivering that doesn't exceed £30,000. And I'm probably teaching people to suck eggs here, but I'm just doing it kind of a bit of an ABC version just to demonstrate this. So yeah, just want to make sure that if you're paying out rent, you've got to pay for people to deliver on the course that you're running. You've got to pay your accountant. You've got to pay for some marketing support, etc. We've just got to make sure that that cost structure doesn't outweigh what you're bringing in, because otherwise you're just going to end up in a bit of a mess. So it's just being really clear, what can you afford to pay out, and what are you bringing in, and what's the plan for that? As the revenue increases, it may be that your cost structure, you can invest more into delivering more. Therefore, you might be in a position where you can take on a space yourself and sign up to a lease for a year. Whereas in the early days, it might be that the better and less risky cost structure is just to hire rooms as and when, or that type of thing. So you're not putting yourself at risk or putting too much financial pressure on yourself. And these are just things just to keep you on track, really. And to understand that in the early days that your model might be quite different in terms of its cost structure than it will be as you progress. So that's the model in a nutshell, and a very quick whiz around and introduction to it, because you could do a whole day's session on this and go really deep into some of these, but I hope it's given you an overview of what can be achieved through the business model canvas and some of the questions to ask yourself as you develop your business.
So is it worth me just nipping, I know we've talked about the business model canvas at large, did you want, I've not flipped onto the slide just that shows it in the bite-sized version, just as
that's what I was going to go on to, Nicola.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
So yeah, so this, if the one before that seems a bit too much and a bit too scary, there's this one. This is like a real introduction to, and the language is more accessible, I feel, as well. And this is a 2-sentence business plan, so it's just basically, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Who has the problem, which, in other words, inverted commas, is your target market. How are you going to solve the problem? Why should someone buy this solution from you? What resources do you need? How you'll reach the customer? How much it'll cost? How you'll make money? When should it be done? So giving yourself a bit of a timeline, and then what are the measures of success? So it's essentially very similar to the one before, but I think it's more accessible in terms of its language, and it's a lot more brief. I think it's a really good starter tool if you want to crack on with that first, and then go into the bigger business model canvas when you've got access to somebody that you can reflect back on with that, like through the coaching sessions. So that's two examples, and we've sent you out the slides, so you can Google these, and there's quite a lot of different templates on. I'd just be mindful that there are obviously business model canvases for private businesses, for private gain, which doesn't pick up on the nuances that we do as social entrepreneurs. So it might not properly differentiate between customers and beneficiaries, and it probably won't have social value proposition on it. So just be careful, just make sure you go down the social business canvas route. And I hope that's been useful. I don't know if anyone's got any questions. A bit of
good feedback there, certainly. Thank you, Aishatu, for makes business planning look doable, which is great. I mean, that's what we're trying to do.
Yay! Somebody's printed. Oh, you printed it off. She's already populating it. That's great.
And it can be really good because, like Joe says, it doesn't overwhelm you. You can just crack on with it. And whether you're doing this for your whole business, or whether you're doing it for just one service, or just an idea, it quickly nails it. It puts it into context for you and you can quickly then talk to other people like us, or other people, other mentors you might have around the idea, and they can connect you into wider support more quickly, because they can see more quickly how far you've got in thinking what you're trying to do.
Yeah, good. Got some good feedback there. So yeah, as I say, if anyone wants to pick this up with me during our one-to-ones, I'm more than happy to. But hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into it, and I hope you find it a useful tool.
Fab. I know we're due to break for lunch shortly. I was just going to check, you know, hopefully you're all in sort of, you know, business planning mode now, but I was just going to just step back and just check whether there were, before we break for lunch, feel free to come off mute, and whether there were any questions or thoughts around the legal structure side of things that we spoke about earlier. And I was keen, I'm just looking who we've got here. I was keen to hear from anyone who's perhaps set up a little bit, you know, maybe a bit further down the line, or who has already set something up, who might just want to say, you know, what they've set up and why. You don't feel that you have to, you probably might be starving and just ready to get some food, but has anybody gone to the lengths of setting up a company or a constituted group as yet? And I just wondered whether anybody had got any reflections on, you know, what they'd set up and why. Tempt anyone in?
I've just registered with the UTR number as a sole trader. Yeah. My husband's an accountant, which is very handy, so he advised me to do that like as soon as I started.
Yeah, and that's the right thing to do as a freelancer, and any social entrepreneur that's getting started, who's trading and earning money. That's all you can do. You can't do anything else because you've not found your kind of tribe, your working group, your director, and anything else yet. So that's day one, and that might suit you for a little while yet. But as you come to think things through, or as you come to evolve, a bit like, you know, we talk about, you know, as an example, Yellow Jigsaw. I'm sure when Grace and Kirsty first got started, freelancing was initially where they started off, but as the organisation evolved and they thought about who they wanted to work with, they'd got a genuine commitment to wanting to reinvest their profits back in the community. Setting up Yellow Jigsaw CIC was a useful thing for them to do that demonstrated them as a social enterprise. It gave them limited liability as that structure, and as they started to grow and evolve, they could apply for different kinds of funding to test out new ideas. So they've done some work called Media Cubs, which works with young people. So although they run their, you know, client work through the company, they can apply for funds and resources to do some of the more hands-on, community-oriented things that they want to do and innovate and bring diverse communities into the media, which is, you know, part of what they want to do. You'll have your own thoughts, but sole traders as far as you can get in the position you're in, Vicky, and then over the next 6 to 12 months or more, you can think through, is this working for me, or, you know, do I want to do something differently? And it might be that having you as a sole trader works just fine, and you don't want to set up a kit, but you do want to set up some community initiatives and some community projects. So I have my Nicola, well, as me, I have a business called Community Pop-Ups, and we do all sorts of sort of pop-up events and community training, and that's my sort of freelance associate sole trader business. But Pop-Up Spa needed its own room and its own legs. So I have a sole trader business with a Unincorporated Association as Pop-Up Spa and Retreat. So the great thing is there's some flexible methods there, that there's no one size fits all, and that thinking things through, you can make things work for you in your own way, with your own vision and ambitions, with who you know or don't know right now, and depending on the types of levels of funding and levels of ambition that you've got with what you want to do. So we can help you think those sorts of things through over the next 6 to 12 months, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, but I've already organised something with Claire at Merrick Street as well for next year, because she's got some funding for getting people back into work. So she's running the mindfulness side of things.
Yes.
And help create digital CVs and do some like online job hunting.
Yeah, and that's all part of this WEA program. So that's fantastic that we've been able to sort of create that, you know, as we've gone along. So really, really good to hear. I know I was just going to come and pick on, if she's still here, is Jenny Smith on the line? Because I know Jenny's part of an organisation. I was just curious.
Yes, I'm here.
Are we allowed to pick on you?
I'm here.
Are we allowed to pick on you to just talk about your sort of governance model or your legal structure at this stage?
Yeah, so I myself in consulting will be just me. I want to, it's aimed at charities and community groups, so it will be a kind of a kick because it's not for profit, but it will be me. So I think that for me will be a sole trader.
Yeah.
But the community hall that we're reopening, we're going as a kick because I don't want to be paid for my position as director, but 2 of the directors will run the centre and they'll take a wage. So we decided that was our best option because they can be paid and they can be paid properly because the centre needs to be run professionally, but it just ensures that any surplus profits we have will be invested back into the community.
Sure, sure.
So that's why we chose that model. But for myself, it's really difficult because what I'll be doing will be helping others, but I don't think others could get funding for me to go in there, if that makes sense. So that's why I think sole trader will be the best option for that to start with.
Yeah, and it may be, you know, we can talk to you about how you can help community groups find that money to do that. You've got 2 options. You either work with the community to help them find the funding to bring you in, you know, that's one thing, but then you're not in control of that, you know, you're at the kind of the waxing and waning of what funding may or may not come in, and you're waxing and waning depending on, well, when the funding does come in, are they going to commit to spending that on you? So there's some risks there, but it does work, and it's a model that works, and things like Awards for All and other local grants and other sort of 5 to 10k funding pots and reaching communities and various other funds can cover the cost of those sorts of things. But
would people still get funding if I was a sole trader? Because it's just me, and
you can't apply. You can't apply for funding for you. But
no, if they applied for funding,
yes.
But they even if I was a sole trader, they can apply for funding.
Yes, to buy you in as specialist support. So long as they're set up as a community group, organisation, charity, or something that's eligible to apply for funding, they can apply for funding, and as part of their bids they can write in, you know, collaborative events, collaborative training, specialist support.
It's just because like I say, the community hall kick's definitely the way to go, because looking from the past projects I've been involved with, charity status and things is a bit, as long as we spend our profit, I believe we don't have to pay tax on it at the end of the year. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So I think kick is definitely the way to go for that, because we need to ensure that the model for the community centre also brings in a profit. So renting it out for parties and private events, and that's why we need decent staff for that model. But to start with, I think for me and the consulting, it'll just be a sole trader, but then possibly look at growing and changing in the future. I don't think I'm ready to be a kick or anything yet.
Yeah, well, that's it, and I think that's the important point, is taking things at your own pace and seeing how things evolve, and see who pops up along your journey, and how your plans and thoughts sort of evolve as that is the case. So I hope that extra bit of chit chat around legal structures just helps bring it to life a little bit. And what I would say is, for anyone who's like thinking, oh, you know, I need to understand this a bit better, or I want to hear some more case studies, I mentioned podcasts before, and I think Joe put the link to this Myths and Legends about social enterprise governance. Our first podcast that we did is still very relevant on this topic, and you're very welcome to go and have a listen to that. And there's a great panel discussion there where 3 different women talk about what they run and why, and there's a really good mix there that helps you get a sense of that. So very welcome to look at that at your leisure. I think we've got to that time, Joe, haven't we, where it's time to say lunch. I'm going to stop recording and hope people get a chance to have a good break.